The technique of repetition, also known as the broken record or persistence technique, is a way of influencing others by repeating a message or idea multiple times. It is often used in situations where an individual or group is trying to persuade someone to adopt a particular belief or behavior. This technique can be effective because it takes advantage of the psychological phenomenon known as the mere exposure effect, which states that people are more likely to prefer something the more they are exposed to it. One example of the technique of repetition in action is the use of propaganda. Governments and other organizations often use propaganda to spread a particular message or ideology. This can be done through various mediums, such as posters, slogans, and news articles. By repeating the same message over and over again, propaganda can influence people's beliefs and attitudes. For example, during World War II, the Nazi Party used propaganda extensively to promote its ideology of racial purity and to vilify its enemies. This included slogans such as Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer, one people, one empire, one leader, which were repeated endlessly in Nazi propaganda. Another example of the technique of repetition can be seen in the history of Carthage. Carthage was a city-state located on the coast of modern-day Tunisia in North Africa. It was founded by Phoenicians and became a major power in the Mediterranean world, rivaling the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic and Carthage engaged in a series of wars known as the Punic Wars, with the Romans ultimately emerging victorious. The Roman senator Cato the Elder was known for using the technique of repetition to manipulate the minds of the people. Whenever he spoke in the Roman Senate, he would always end his speeches with the same phrase, "And furthermore, I think that Carthage must be destroyed." This repetition was intended to get his listeners to become accustomed to this idea. Eventually, the Romans did destroy Carthage in a brutal and bloody battle. Another example of the technique of repetition can be seen in advertising. Advertisers often use repetition to make their products more memorable and to create brand recognition. This can be done through the use of slogans, jingles, and repeating images or themes in advertisements. For example, the fast food chain McDonald's has used the slogan "I'm loving it" in its advertising for many years. By repeatedly using the slogan, McDonald's has been able to create a strong association between the phrase and its brand. The technique of repetition can also be seen in everyday conversations. People often repeat certain phrases or ideas in order to persuade others to adopt their point of view. For example, someone might repeat the phrase "guns don't kill people. People kill people" in order to argue against stricter gun control laws. By repeating this phrase multiple times, the speaker is attempting to influence the listener's belief about gun violence. The effectiveness of the technique of repetition is supported by scientific research. One study found that repeated exposure to a message increased the likelihood that people would accept it as true. Another study found that repeating a message increased the likelihood that people would remember it, even if they did not necessarily agree with it. Despite its potential effectiveness, it is important to be critical of information that is presented through repetition. The technique can be used to manipulate people's thoughts and beliefs, and it is important to evaluate the validity of a message rather than simply accepting it because it has been repeated multiple times. It is also important to consider the source of the repeated message, as it may be biased or have ulterior motives for promoting a particular idea. In conclusion, the technique of repetition is a way of influencing others by repeating a message or idea multiple times. It can be seen in propaganda, advertising, and everyday conversations, and is supported by scientific research. One historical example of the technique of repetition in action is the use of propaganda by the Roman senator Cato the Elder, who repeatedly called for the destruction of Carthage in order to manipulate the minds of his listeners. In advertising, repetition is used to create brand recognition and make products more memorable, such as through the use of slogans and jingles. In everyday conversations, people may repeat certain phrases or ideas in order to persuade others to adopt their point of view. While repetition can be a powerful tool for influencing others, it is important to be critical of information presented through repetition and to consider the source and potential biases of the message. It is also important to evaluate the validity of a message rather than simply accepting it because it has been repeated multiple times. By being aware of the technique of repetition and being mindful of the information we are exposed to, we can better protect ourselves against manipulation and make more informed decisions.